Have you noticed that all the newspapers are calling Taylor Swift and the Eras Tour a religion? The ABC called Taylor Swift the most godlike performer on the planet. Her songwriting collaborator Jack Antonoff has said that questioning Swift's songwriting ability was like challenging someone's faith in God. And the New York Times described the Eras Tour as a spiritual experience, like the Temple Mount or the Vatican, except for girls. As a historian of ancient religion, the idea of a religion designed specially for women and girls is really nothing new. The goddess Artemis, who represented the hunt, wild animals, and girlhood, was worshipped in ancient Greece from the period of 1000 BC to the 4th century AD. So for at least 1,500 years, there was a whole religion that catered primarily to the needs of girls and women. I would argue that the worship of the goddess Artemis in ancient Greece actually has a lot of similarities with Taylor Swift and the Eras Tour today. And it goes beyond the superficial similarities. They're both the archer, they both have girl groups that are notorious for having slight sapphic vibes. Don't worry, this is not a gala conspiracy video.
They ask you how you are, you just have to say that you're fine when you're not really fine, but you just can't get into it because they would never understand.
And they both have this girlish, virginal quality despite being adult women. But I would argue the similarity goes far deeper. They serve similar social needs, cater to a similar audience, and I would argue use similar techniques to do so. Girls and the things they enjoy are often treated as low culture or even profane. However, both the cult of Artemis and the Swiftie fandom elevate everyday experiences of girlhood into spiritual experiences. They both create communal, multisensory experiences based around the needs of women and girls. They use similar myths, iconography, and rituals. Finally, they create a community with its own hierarchical structure, which is all based around a parasocial relationship to a powerful central female figure. Join me as we take a step back in time to one of the most famous cults, which was aimed predominantly at women. If you were to step back in time to around 400 BC and take a look through the Temple of Artemis at Bowden near Athens, it would look a lot like a messy girl's bedroom. You would find a collection of girls' toys and childhood possessions. You might see a ball, a tambourine, a doll. You would find a random assortment of clothes strewn on racks, some old, some half-finished, and others beautifully handcrafted and glamorous. You would find statues of the goddess Artemis herself, dressed up like one of those dolls in an array of different clothes, and housed in a smaller inner sanctuary of her own. The goddess Artemis was best known as the virgin goddess, but she was also the huntress, the daughter of Zeus, the one who eternally inhabits the woods with a band of nymphs who have all also renounced romantic contact with men. She was the protectress of wild animals, girls, and women in childbirth. This might seem like a strange combination of attributes, but it reflects the way that the ancient Greeks saw little girls as essentially wild, untamed beings who desperately needed the civilizing influence of marriage to render them into functioning members of society. As such, her temple represents those same wild and uncultivated sides of the feminine experience. Take, for example, the rites of the Baronia, where a group of girls aged 5 to 10 would gather at night wearing saffron robes in order to dance wildly and sacrifice a goat to the goddess. You know, every little girl needs to go through a goat sacrifice phase. Most of the offerings at the temple represented a moment of transition or crisis in a girl's journey to womanhood. Take, for example, the toys at the sanctuary. The toys all came from girls who were about to get married. And when I say girls, I really do mean it. The average age of marriage for Athenian girls was only 14. Marriage was a time when girlhood was cut brutally short. But the temple offered young women a chance to mourn their girlhood in public. This poem was written for one such occasion. Timareta, the daughter of Timaratus, before her wedding has dedicated to you, Artemis of the lake, her tambourine and her pretty ball, and the ribbon that kept her hair, and her dolls too, and their dresses, a virgin's gift, as is fit to Virgin Artemis. But, daughter of Leto, hold your hand over the girl, and purely keep her in purity. This poem always makes me really sad, because it's this moment when the girl needed to give up her cherished childhood toys in order to get married and become a woman before she was truly ready. And they represented a memory of girlhood that would live on forever in the temple of Artemis. And I suppose the girl could come back and revisit those girlhood memories and celebrate them with a community of other women who had gone through similar experiences. Clothes were also a way of honouring the goddess, and women would labour for hours, weeks, and even days to craft the finest garments to give to the sanctuary. And when they were done, they would embroider their own names in them so that they too could be remembered. Giving clothes to the goddess was a huge honour, but having the goddess actually wear those clothes was an even bigger honour. Dressing and washing the statue of the goddess was a ritual in its own right. That's why the statue of Artemis at Ephesus looked like this, because so many people wanted the honour of dressing the goddess in their clothes that she ended up wearing all of them at once. Some of the clothes would have come from women and girls who were no longer there. Artemis extended her protection for girls also to women who were in childbirth. Most women in ancient Greece were expected to devote most of their time to textile production. Any woman in ancient Greece would have a craft project that she was working on at any given time. And so when women did pass away in childbirth, one way that the family would mourn them was to give their craft projects and their clothes to the temple of Artemis as a gift. The sanctuary didn't just hold offerings, it held moments of fleeting female lives. Girls who were forced to grow up too soon, or girls who didn't make it through the worst trial of their lives. These objects represented memories that would otherwise be lost to oblivion. But through the goddess and through the temple of Artemis, they could live on forever, and they could be remembered by a community of worshippers. Part of the genius of Taylor Swift's world building is how she takes everyday objects and transforms them into religious symbols. She intricately weaves them into her mythology and turns them into rituals which are simple and easy to replicate, and yet they are powerful. Just as the Temple of Artemis took the everyday objects that women touched and turned them into everlasting memorials of that fleeting female life, the Eras Tour is a dense web of symbols, all of which reflect the very public life of Miss Taylor Swift.
This would not have been possible without Swift's extensive catalogue of autobiographical songs, each of which represents her experience coming of age in the public eye over a 20-year period. But it also wouldn't have been possible without the fan culture that's built lore around the songs. Finding references to Taylor Swift's exes in her songs is really just the tip of the Swiftie iceberg. Swifties have their own numerology. The number 13 represents Taylor's birthday and her lucky number. Swifties have their own colour theory. Her passion burns red, while Joe Alwyn's heart is blue. Swifties invest a lot of meaning in clothing. Let's take the red scarf, one of the most powerful symbols in the Swiftie canon, as an example. The reference comes from the song All Too Well, which chronicles Swift's devastation following a breakup which happened around the time of her 21st birthday. In the song, an unnamed ex has surreptitiously retained the red scarf that she left at his sister's house, and keeps it in a drawer as an ill-gotten memento of their brief time together. It did not take fans long to revisit paparazzi images from around that time to identify Jake Gyllenhaal as the scarf culprit. In the many images of the couple taking autumnal strolls together, however, there was not a red scarf to be seen. When interviewed about it, his sister also seemed confused.
You know, I never understood why everybody asked me about this scarf.
She had no recollection of a red scarf that was left at her house. So why then has Jake Gyllenhaal been accused of scarf theft? Fans have long held a theory that the red scarf was not a literal scarf, but a metaphor for Swift losing her virginity. Her ex kept the scarf, according to this interpretation, and the line in All Too Well, because it reminds him of innocence and it smells like me, has been interpreted by fans not just as a symbol of the intensity of the relationship, but as a remarkably visceral allusion to her first sexual encounter. Just like the racks of clothing in the Temple of Artemis, The red scarf immortalizes a memory of a fleeting moment of transformation and loss. I'm not interested in engaging in parasocial speculation about whether or not this is true, but I do think it says a lot about the Swiftie fandom and how the fans have turned a song into a full-blown mythology and coming-of-age ritual. At every Eras concert, you will see fans decked out in red scarves, and this is just one of dozens of iconic pieces of clothing which represent theatrically exaggerated and mythologized memories of Taylor Swift's life. From the infamous fedora hat to the folklore cardigan to the meringue bridal dress. This is not only genius marketing for merch, but also provides fans with a very simple way to imitate Swift.
Just as worshippers of Artemis would vie over the honour of dressing the goddess in their clothing, Swifties are clamouring to dress up like Taylor Swift, and this is part of the ritual of the Eras tour. Swifties are invited not to just identify with Taylor Swift, but rather to turn her life into a kind of pageant that they reenact together.
Fans make a game out of copying Taylor Swift. Imitation is not just the highest form of flattery, it is a form of worship. During the ancient Athenian festival of the Adonia, for example, women would recreate Aphrodite's mourning for the death of her mortal lover, Adonis. The women of Athens took on the role of Aphrodite. They all had to pretend to be at a funeral grieving their dead lover. The women of Athens did not just empathise with Aphrodite's grief, they became her, thus bringing the myth to life and repeating it over and over again over the years. The ritual provided a space for women of different walks of life and social statuses to bond over shared experiences of grief and loss. The red scarf and the 10 minutes of collective mourning for the loss of Taylor Swift's innocence is just one of the many rituals which comprise the Eras tour. The concert itself is like a church service which has its own very specific order of ceremonies which the crowd knows back to front. The crowd knows when they're supposed to chant. You can make me drink. 1, 2, 3, let's go, bitch! The crowd knows when it's the right time to give a standing ovation, right after champagne problems. They know when Taylor Swift is about to give her fedora to a kid in the crowd, and at almost every Eras show, there will be a proposal in the crowd at the exact moment during Love Story when she sings, "And he knelt to the ground and he pulled out a ring." The engagement is its very own coming-of-age ritual, which is sanctified by the Church of Swift. The whole thing is an exercise in celebrating and reclaiming the lost innocence of girlhood, and friendship, and memories, and smiles, and rainbows. So wholesome, right? Right?
So, I didn't tell you everything you needed to know about the cult of Artemis, but you should know that Artemis has a dark side. Girls may be sugar spice and everything nice, but Artemis is not. Like most Greek gods, she is capricious, angry, and vengeful. But unlike other Greek gods, she has a pretty good reason for that.
Let's just say that Artemis and her dream of leading a tribe of reclusive virgins in the woods was constantly under threat. Her friends were slowly getting picked off one by one at the hands of predatory men, mostly Apollo, her creepy brother, or Zeus, her creepy dad. But Artemis didn't really have the power to fight against them, so she took her revenge on mortals where she could. One day, Artemis was bathing in the woods with her band of nymphs when a mortal man called Actaeon was out hunting and stumbled upon the scene. He witnessed Artemis herself in a state of undress. In her blind rage, Artemis transformed him into a stag and sent his own hounds to hunt him down. Sometimes her anger was directed towards the wrong target. When her companion Callisto was assaulted by Zeus, in a fit of rage, Artemis transformed her one-time friend into a bear. Zeus took pity on Callisto and transformed her into a constellation. Artemis hated when one of her girls was taken from her, and this is why most of the rituals in the cult existed to appease the goddess. The offerings, the expensive clothes, the dances, the sacrifices, all of these were attempts to compensate Artemis for her suffering when a girl grows up. But sometimes the only thing that would satisfy her was blood. In ancient Sparta, Artemis played a role in the painful process of turning boys into warriors. Myth had it that the statue of Artemis in Sparta had been stolen from the land of Tauros, and this angered the goddess. The only way to appease her was through the public flogging of young men until their blood drenched the altar. The priestess would, supposedly, hold the stolen statue of Artemis, and if any young man got off too lightly, the statue would immediately become too heavy to hold until the price was exacted from him.
Hey girlies, have you heard that girlhood is having a moment? I just want to wear my ribbons and my little baby doll dresses and have my girl dinner and do some goat sacrifice and douse the altar with the blood of adolescent boys. After all, I'm a girl's girl.
There certainly is a dark side to the wrath of the Swiftie fandom, including the intense harassment of Swift's exes, her exes' exes, anyone who gives her a bad review, anyone who remotely criticises her or crosses her in any way. But the most vitriol is reserved for the men. Many a young man has suffered a public lashing from Taylor Swift over the years. Gyllenhaal, for example, has publicly donned a comically oversized red scarf in a magazine shoot as an act of atonement. Again, the fans not only use Taylor Swift's music as a form of catharsis for their own feelings of rage and anguish, the most enraptured fans identify with Swift and take on her anger and its targets as their own. Swift has also been able to mobilise the outrage of her fan base to achieve genuine progress in musicians' rights, in the fight against sexual violence, such as her campaign against AI-generated sexual images. She has also mobilised her devoted fan base to help her take back control over her public image and her album recordings.
This sense of anger and bitterness has also featured heavily in her music. For someone who's known as a purveyor of saccharine sweet kids bop, she certainly likes using imagery of death. In her 2017 album Reputation, themes of guilt, sin, judgment, retribution, and even transcendence feature in spades. While this was a response to her cancellation in 2016 at the hands of Kanye West and Kim Kardashian, it's also serving a deeper purpose.
Death and Rebirth is a powerful narrative structure which is at the core of what comparative mythographers have called the hero's journey. In most narratives, the hero's journey will begin with a call to action and separation from their old familiar world. Then they find themselves in a new unfamiliar world, where they experience a series of trials and challenges, culminating in a fall into the abyss where they experience a symbolic death, followed by a resurrection. Here the hero transforms and atones for their sins. This transformation allows them to return to the old familiar world, albeit transformed by the journey they've experienced. The archetypical example is the myth of Persephone. One sunny day, Persephone, the young daughter of fertility goddess Ceres, was minding her own business, picking flowers in a field, when Hades, the god of the underworld, abducted her and made her his bride in the underworld. Ceres was heartbroken by the loss of her daughter, so she transformed the earth into a barren wasteland, until Hades finally relented and allowed Persephone to leave for 6 months of the year, when the world gets to enjoy fertility. Persephone's journey is a violent transplant from her old familiar world of girlhood innocence into a hostile underworld, where she experiences a form of social death, and then is reborn on the other side as a woman and a goddess, but one who will never be the same. One who must always live between two worlds. In Reputation, Swift masterfully turns her cancellation into a hero's journey. She went from precocious child and girly pop princess to dying a social death at the hands of a ravenous Twitter mob, becoming queen of the underworld, and clawing her way out of the grave to be reborn on the other side as an adult woman. What started out as petty internet squabbling between celebrities has been elevated into a myth of rebirth and redemption.
Taylor Swift understands the assignment. In order to live forever as a pop star, you have to die and be reborn 1,000 little times. So, in order to live forever, Taylor Swift turns her deaths and her rebirths into a spectacle in their own right, even into a ritual in the form of the Eras Tour. The rite of passage was also how worshippers were initiated into what modern scholars have termed mystery cults. All a mystery cult really means is that it was an ancient religion
where there was a level of secret knowledge which had to be unlocked through deeper membership of the group. Sometimes there was even an institutionalized hierarchy, and to pass from one level of the religion into the next, you needed to go through a rite of passage. This created kind of secret societies of the ancient world, where membership could be a marker of significant social status, as well as a religious experience.
According to this theory, rites of passage consist of 3 phases. 1, the separation stage, where the initiate leaves their old identity and environment behind. 2, the liminal stage, where they enter into a space of limbo. Here, they experience some kind of challenge or trial that culminates in a social or metaphorical death. 3, finally, the integration stage, in which the initiate is reborn into their new social role. You could apply this structure to many rituals in the world, ancient and modern. It's like hazing rituals at college sororities, where the initiate separates from their uncomfortable home life and high school identity and endures a series of sadistic trials at the hands of a sorority, then emerges on the other side, reborn as a member of the group. The highest ranks of the fandom rally under the banner of the Taylor Nation, which is the official fan group organised by Swift's management team through social media. This team scours the internet for the loyalist Swifties and rewards them for their devotion through greater closeness to Taylor Swift herself. Taylor Swift may even like their posts on social media. Since the early days of her fame, Taylor Swift has been known to lurk on MySpace, Tumblr, and more recently on Instagram, scouring for new fan theories and even bestowing a coveted like on her favourite posts. In the ancient world, women would give the portraits of themselves to the goddess, hoping to make themselves and their experiences visible to her. Nowadays, Swifties obsessively tag Taylor Swift's publicist in their Insta posts, hoping that one day they will get noticed by their Lord and Saviour, Taylor Allison Swift. Hardcore Swifties have a hierarchy amongst themselves, and those who show their dedication through social media posting or acts of service to fellow Swifties may even be chosen to receive tickets to her shows or even meet Taylor Swift herself. The ultimate epiphany is the Secret Sessions, a private show held at one of Taylor Swift's houses for the innermost circle of her most devout Swifties. Here, she plays them her unreleased albums, takes pictures with them, and rewards them with the same secret divine knowledge and intimacy.
After all, Taylor Swift is always both watching and being watched. Taylor Swift is the panopticon. At the heart of both Swiftie fandom and the cult of Artemis is this feeling that you're sharing your experiences with the goddess. This might be through identifying with a Taylor Swift lyric. This might be through sharing clothing. This could even be through reenacting a Swiftie breakup and expressing your pent-up rage in your own relationship at Taylor Swift's exes. At the end of the day, Swifties become Taylor, and Taylor Swift becomes the fan.
I feel like my ego is dissolving, and I'm becoming one with the universe. It's almost like I'm Tay-holing.
I tend to think that while humans have evolved in technological sophistication, emotionally, we're very much the same creatures that we were 2,000 years ago. Religions have developed techniques to reach people on an emotional level over thousands of years, using a combination of image, sound, ritual, storytelling, and community. However, these techniques can be just as persuasive and powerful in the secular world. The cult of Artemis did not just provide communities and rituals that met the emotional needs of women and girls. It also provided a physical space for them. Increasingly, the modern world doesn't make space for girls in public. The Eras Tour was a phenomenon because it provided a rare opportunity to have a public space aimed mostly at women and girls. But ultimately, this was a temporary space. In a sense, the real cult of Taylor Swift lives online. Many credit Taylor Swift's rise to fame to her masterful use of social media. She was, after all, an early adopter of Tumblr and MySpace, platforms where young women used to congregate back in the early 2000s. Technology is creating virtual religions, building communities that may be geographically separate, but are joined by some common interest, belief, or experience. Perhaps the reason why popular culture is starting to look a bit like a polytheistic religion is because the internet and algorithmic content platforms are increasingly causing polarization and segmentation within our culture. Gender is one of the biggest dividing lines in this cultural split, so it's no wonder that popular musicians are leaning into highly gendered imagery and experiences. I'm definitely not immune to it either. I attended the Eras tour and got really swept up in the ritualistic nature of it and the enormous outpouring of emotion. I think one of the reasons that I buy into it and find it powerful is that as a woman in my 30s, it integrates experiences that I had as a girl and a young woman into my adult life. Unlike ancient Athenian women, we don't have to part with our girlhoods at age 14. But it's still important to remember those experiences and still identify with them as an adult. On some level, Taylor Swift's music keeps growing as she does. Her latest album, The Tortured Poets Department, featured more profanity and drug references than any of her previous work. But she keeps returning to the motif of high school and adolescent experiences time and time again. Perhaps because she shared her adolescence with her audience, living it out in the public eye. In the ancient world, you would get that experience by actually living in the same community that you grew up in, so they would actually know your adolescent experiences. It reminds me of this poem which came from the Temple of Artemis and was dedicated alongside a portrait of a young woman. This is written by an older female poet called Gnosis. She was writing about a teenage girl who had just gotten married. This tablet shows Thumarita. Well, indeed, it portrayed the pride and the ripeness of the tender-eyed girl. Even your house-guarding puppy would wag her tail on seeing you, thinking she gazed on the mistress of the mansion. So this is an epigraph which describes the portrait that was physically given at the temple. But there is a bit of tongue-in-cheek in the way she describes it. She's saying it's so lifelike that if your dog saw this picture of you, it would wag its tail because it would think that it's seeing the real girl. But it has a bit of irony and a bit of sadness underneath that. Ever since her marriage, everybody treats Thumarita like she is the lady of the house. She's a fully grown woman who has to take on the responsibilities of being a fully grown woman. But she's been able to keep her childhood pet, her dog. And the dog is the only person who sees her for who she really is, as a girl. The poem very lightly pokes fun at a girl who's been forced to adopt the posture of a grown woman. It captures an older woman's perspective on the complicated relationship between a girl, her dog, and this new social role that she doesn't quite fit into. I think the Eras Tour is powerful for the exact same reason. Taylor Swift is constantly revisiting her younger self through the lens of an older and more experienced person. And she always does so with empathy and love. And I think that's just incredibly rare in pop culture, and perhaps in culture more generally. How often do we form intergenerational friendships like that and share experiences in the same way that you could in the ancient world? This is definitely not to say that I think Swiftie fandom is perfect. I've already mentioned that it has a very difficult relationship with public outpourings of rage and feelings of shame. However, there are other valid criticisms, including the fact that it takes this ritualistic experience and commodifies it, and also the fact that it centers the experience of a super wealthy white woman. I don't want to pretend like the cult of Artemis was perfect either. It was, after all, a part of a very unequal society, and arguably reinforced the social role that women were supposed to play, even though it offered them a sort of temporary relief or escape from it. But I do think both are onto something that we need a lot more of, and that's pretty hard to find, which is intergenerational communities that share experiences. On the one hand, I'm really dazzled by the scale at which the Swiftie fandom is able to operate, mostly because of the internet. However, I worry that we don't have these experiences on a smaller scale anymore. I'm not sure how I feel about a religion that is so thoroughly mediated through the internet. On the other hand, I don't exactly want to run into the woods and sacrifice a goat either. So I suppose for now, I'm just going to throw on folklore and pretend that I'm doing it in my head.